Which creepy urban legend turned out to be true? For the last several years in Toronto, gay men have gone missing in the village. The community was convinced it was a serial killer on the loose, but the police said no, these disappearances are unrelated. Turns out, that's totally the case, and the guy was killing gay men, dismembering them and burying them in and around the properties he was working at as a groundskeeper or landscaper. Black Volga. In the 60s and 70s, there existed an urban legend in Poland that vampires in black limousines were kidnapping people, preferably little children. It was a tale parents told their kids, who would then tell their friends, etc. Turns out, it was a rumor that was spread by the Polish secret police, who actually used black cars to kidnap people. The aim was that no one would believe someone who would report they had witnessed a kidnapping. Raymond Robinson, the Green Man. Dude lost his eyes and nose and wandered the streets at night in Pennsylvania because he couldn't go outside in the daytime because of how he looked. People saw him, and an urban legend in AITAH was born. In Liverpool, kids are taught about Purple from a young age. He's been locally known and feared for honestly 3 decades. He likes feeling boys' muscles and makes them do squats. He's completely real. He's even had court orders against him, preventing him from feeling people's muscles. I hope you get Ped by Purple is a common insult, and a very real fear. I went to a university near Valley Forge, PAC. It used to be a POW camp and a military hospital before the college bought the entire property for $1 in the 1960s. Since there are really only 3 universities near Valley Forge, PA, it will not be hard to deduce which college it was. Lol. Anyways, there was a rumor that underground tunnels and all sorts of stuff was left abandoned in the abandoned sections of the college. Sure enough, it was true. We found a tunnel hatch under our carpet in our dorm room, 2 hatches on the first floor. Furthest first floor dorm room of each building. It was literally like stepping into 1945. Everything was preserved down there, and the tunnels were massive. We eventually ended up in an underground garage, where there were 4 Jeeps parked, but all the tires had dry rotted. We realized this was actually beneath our soccer field. Anyways, the tunnels lead to the cafeteria, the admin building, every dorm, and then an old abandoned section of our campus that we had no way of entering. Top side. We soon realized this was the hospital, or more. When we got out of the tunnels and walked the floor, it was still like 1945. All the hospital beds were still there. The surgical curtains were still there. Hell, even the tools like the scalpel, saw, pliers, etc. were still on their trays. It was like everyone all of the sudden up and left, and nothing had been moved since then. The morgue still had its slabs, and sometimes we would dare each other to slide in there for a period of time. But yeah, it was an urban legend on campus until 3 of us decided to risk expulsion to see if it was true. And it was. The North Pond Hermit. Things would go missing in this little vacation community, and people attributed it to some mysterious dude. Turned out there was one. He lived out in the woods for 27 years without ever talking to anyone. Out here in Washington, there were rumors of a fairy house in the woods somewhere. One park ranger decided to go hunting for it, and he actually did find a treehouse in the woods. When he looked inside, he found a ton of child pornography. He took it down and came back a while later and found it had been put back up. They eventually found who had been using the treehouse and arrested him. Cropsey, sort of like the boogeyman of Staten Island. During the 70s and 80s, kids on the island would go missing, and the urban legend would attribute it to Cropsey. As it turned out, there really was a crazy kidnapper and serial killer who was responsible. He was caught and convicted. There is a great documentary about it, used to be on Netflix. Not sure if it still is, called Cropsey. McUltra. The CIA was experimenting with drugs to attempt to mind control people. When I was a kid, my dad would take me and my brother to High Rock. It's a neat overlook, and we could play on the rocks. It was fun, but also a little sobering as much as things can be for kids, because a girl had died in a hang gliding accident, if I remember right. As you drive up to the parking lot for the overlook, the road continues on into the woods. We asked our dad where it went, and he told us that you'd be driving down the road, and suddenly armed guards would pop out of the woods to stop you because there was a secret government base there. That's the case, except it isn't really secret. It's Raven Rock, which is a nuclear bunker that can act as a remote Pentagon if the country is attacked. Cheney went there during Sept. 11 while Bush was taken somewhere else. You will be detained if you trespass on the property. I went back to High Rock a few years ago while visiting family, and while hanging out at the overlook, a truck of teenagers showed up. They asked if I knew what was up the access road, and I told them Raven Rock, and not to keep going because they'd be detained. They decided they wanted to check it out anyway. An hour later, when I left High Rock, those kids had not come back yet, so I figured they were getting their asses chewed out by a soldier. The rumors that Sir Jimmy Savile was a pedophile. It's now estimated he abused 500 children. And further to that, while still unconfirmed, the rumors which he started that he molested corpses, while having now confirmed, unsupervised access to NHS mortuaries are now more substantiated. That there's something making people disappear in our area in Nevada. As a kid, it was more so they were hinting at aliens. Then as we grew up, the disappearances have been a little too eerie, and it's been suspected that there's investigations that have been going on as to whether or not there's a serial killer in our area. I carry a firearm when traveling through and don't stop until I get to the cities. If you guys are ever coming through, just don't stop for anyone, especially after the darkness sets in. Not really an urban legend, but a fish cafe in my hometown says that its supports are made out of whale bones. Turns out many years ago, a whale got stranded on a nearby island and died, and the owner took some rib bones and used it as arches for his business. This is, thankfully, a somewhat more light-hearted urban legend than a lot of the posted ones so far. So, I'd heard several times from friends and whatnot, hearsay tales about this creepy, near-mythical shoe licker who resided in the Tampa area. Apparently, this dude would walk up to people in public spaces, and would ask them about their shoes, and ask to see the bottoms of them, and would then drop and do his best to lick the bottoms of the shoes before the person could step back down. Naturally, I thought that was just way too weird, and there was no way this wasn't just people making up some B's story. Then I ran into the guy at a taco truck. Skinny dude, longish hair, probably homeless from how he was dressed. Could have been 18, could have been 30. Walks up as I'm waiting for what turns out to have been the best taco ever had in my existence, a coquinita pibble, for the curious, and asks about the shoes I'm wearing. I just finished performing, and was still wearing some Doc Marten boots, and was more than a little soused. He asks if he can see the treads or something like that. I'm all confused and am like, sure, why not? And he drops to the floor, grabs my boot, and starts licking away at the sole. I yelled at the dude, sort of kicked at him, and he scampers off. Weirdest ducking interaction ever. When I was young, living rural Ontario, we were told as children not to wander too far into the forest, saying that a monster would get us and we wouldn't come home. If anybody knows who Rock 30 is, that actually turned out to be painfully true. We had an older couple that would come into the store I worked at when I was 15. They clearly had mental development or mental health problems, and the rumor was they were siblings, and the two teenage girls with them were their children. About 5 years later, I find out someone had called the state about them, and turns out from what I remember to be mostly true. The parents were apparently the result of incest, and they carried on the family tradition, as it were. I think the state removed their daughters and put them in state custody since they weren't able to take care of themselves, and I don't remember what happened to the parents. That creepy old guy living down the street was actually the Golden State Killer. There were abandoned tunnels below my town. A large part used to be a self-sustaining mental institution covering several square miles. Everyone talked about them, but none ever talked about actually being in them. Went spelunking in the woods and found an old maintenance shack. There was a basement that was flooded. Went back a couple years later when there was bad drought. Basement has a rusted door leading into said tunnels. Nothing special, and no escaped crazy people. It was only a legend for like a week, but a kid went missing on the same property we lived on, and everyone thought his brother had something to do with it, but police said no, he was kidnapped. Turned out the brother had killed his brother and buried him in our backyard. Creepy Pete that used to hang out in the kids' pool every Saturday at the leisure center actually turned out to be a pedo. He got arrested a couple years ago. When we were little, the kids in the pool would swim through his legs, and the parents would just laugh. Pedos were basically urban legends back then. Way too true now. Some woman was living in this guy's house without him knowing it for a year. This is a very recent and local story as it happened at a middle school that I used to attend. There was this janitor, though he actually left when I was still at the school, and substitute bus driver at our school that everyone loved. He would give all of the kids candy and show them around the areas of the school that kids weren't supposed to go, like the boiler room. I even heard that he ate dinner at a kid's house once. Even after he left the school, he would still visit sometimes. Just say hi to the kids. There were always some jokes that he was a pedo, but everyone at the school loved him and thought that he was a great guy. Recently, he was arrested for having thousands of pictures and videos of CP. Makes things pretty weird in hindsight.